Okay, so in this video, I'm going to talk about some strategies we can use to read more effectively when we're trying to learn things. So the first thing I want to talk about is some misinformation that's out there online and that you will see. So a lot of people reject reading as a method for learning. They reject it maybe because it's hard work, because they think it doesn't actually work for them, or they think that reading in general is very ineffective. But all those things are not true. So there's the one particular thing that comes up time and again online called the learning pyramid here. And this is something that gets shared quite widely. And it's what this essentially shows you is different things you can do to try and learn information and how much of it you'll retain in the future. So this information is not backed up by science at all. There is no research backing up the learning pyramid, so please ignore it as far as you possibly can. It's just utter rubbish. So let's look in more depth about this. So the general principle behind the learning pyramid is correct. So the things at the top of the learning pyramid are what are called passive learning things. So essentially things that you can do that require you not to do very much thinking. And they're absolutely correct that you will not remember stuff that you don't think about. That part of it is correct. So the problem with the pyramid, though, is that reading isn't necessarily a passive learning activity. A lot of people do it in a passive way, so people try to just skim read text, or they just copy it out from a word for word. Those are both passive activities because they don't have you doing any hard thinking. So those will mean you have a very low retention of information. So what we need to do when we're reading is to make it hard work for our brain, and we need to slow down our interaction with the text so we can really process the information and start to get a really good idea of what we're trying to learn about. So if we can do that, that's going to lead to a massive increase in the amount that we retain over time. So next, I'm going to talk to you about why you should actually use reading for learning and why it's better than other methods you can use. So I'm going to compare it to a way most people go about learning stuff, and it's that they go into a classroom and they get somebody called a teacher to try and explain stuff to them. So this is great if there's just one of you in the class and you've got a 1-2 tutorial. That would be a very effective way to learn because it can be tailored specifically to you. Great. But usually there's a large number of other people in the class, so it's very unlikely that the lesson is going to proceed in a way that actually matches with the speed you need and has the information that you need. So the reason I think reading is a better way of doing it is actually you can process information at the speed that is appropriate for you. So you might know a lot about the topic already and only need a little bit of information so you can work through it pretty quickly, or you may know nothing about a topic at all, in which case you need to spend a lot more time learning the terminology and processing these new concepts. So I'm not trying to say that having a teacher is a bad thing. It's a very effective thing. They can find different ways of explaining stuff to you, and they're very useful. But I think reading is a valuable part of a normal learning process if you get it working at a speed that works for you. So, what's the problem with reading at the moment? So, if you open up a book, most of them contain a heck of a lot of information, and when we start trying to read them, our brain is overloaded, which means we get really frustrated by it and we don't learn a whole bunch because we get bored and stop doing it. So that's one problem, and the further through education you get, the bigger the books get and the more information they have in them. And you have to learn to deal with that and to use them effectively. So one of the first keys for effective reading is reading for a purpose. If you just open up a textbook to a page, start reading and trying to learn stuff, that's not going to be very effective because there is no purpose to you doing that reading. You need a reason to be doing that reading, so then you know exactly which bits to focus on. And the other advantage of having a clear goal is it allows you to focus down the amount of information that you're processing. So we can take going from a whole book or even a whole page worth of stuff to focusing down onto just paragraphs of text. The next thing that you really need to make sure you do is get reading material that's appropriate for your level of learning. So if you just Google stuff online, you have no idea what level that's pitched at. It might be university level, it might be primary school level. You don't know that that's the right kind of stuff. So make sure you take the time to select stuff that's appropriate for your level. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I go about using reading for learning, and I'm going to do it with something I don't know anything about, so you can actually see how the process works. So what we're going to look at. So I was watching House yesterday, and they were in the episode talking quite a lot about the lymphatic system, because I think somebody had a tumor in one of their lymph nodes. So I was watching it and it was all very entertaining, but then I was like, well, what on earth is this lymphatic system? I've never heard about this. I don't remember learning about this when I did biology at school, because I stopped doing it when I was 16. So actually, I wanted to find more about it. So that was what I was trying to do. And in terms of specifically what I wanted to get out of the reading I was going to do, I wanted to know what the lymphatic system was, what its purpose is, so what it does in the human body, and I also wanted to know how it fitted in with the things that I already know. So when you're trying to learn about something, it's important that you try and place it with the knowledge that you already have. So that's always a key question I'm going to be asking when I'm reading. So to find out this information, I went onto a page for medical school students, because I figured that would be kind of the pitch I would be interested in there. So I've done a fair amount of biology before, so I selected that, and I figured it would explain quite well the point of the system and match in with what I was watching in House quite well, hopefully anyway. So this is the particular page on this university system that I found about the lymphatic system, and I've chopped it down straight away to the information that is relevant to the questions that I'm asking. So there were pages and pages and pages of information, but these ones were the ones that were specifically focused on what it is, what it does, and how it fits in, because I just skimmed through it to check kind of what was generally about. So now we need to get down to the process of doing some good hard thinking and slowing down the learning process. So looking at this information, there is a massive problem for me at the moment, and is that there are lots of words on this page that I don't necessarily know what they mean. So some of these I vaguely remember learning about in biology, like circulatory system or pathogens, but I wanted to know specifically what they were, and then there's some new things which I just didn't know what it meant. So we need to look those up before we can even begin to learn anything from this resource. So that's what I did. So I went through here. You can see I've highlighted the words. If you've got it on paper, obviously you can use a highlighter for it. I just go through the information and I highlight every word that I don't know. That is my starting point, because we need to find out what those are. And what we need to do is look them up. And we need to be careful about this. If you just Google these words, you will come up with some information that's probably not very helpful, because Google is just going to throw in some stuff that it finds online and hope that it's what you're looking for. So the medical page I was on had a glossary of key terminology towards the end, so I used that. Most textbooks have a similar type thing. They have a glossary at the end where they explain what the terminology means. Those are the places you should be looking to find these words. A dictionary is not a very good place, or a thesaurus not a very good place to be looking, because again, those aren't pitched at subject specific information, so those aren't great. So that's what I did. So I looked those up, and then what I did was I created a Memrise course to help me practice the information that I didn't know. And if you want to know more about that, have a look at the previous video I made about memorizing information to see how that works and that kind of thing. So I found out what the words mean, and I've gone through a process of trying to practice that information. So I have this information in my working memory, so I can use this information now. So next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and answer my questions. So it's really important when we're doing this to not just copy out of the text. So what you're trying to do is take information you're reading and turn it into something that is useful for you. So you will obviously be using quite a few parts of the text, but you'll see what I've done is I've tried to turn it into information that I can actually work with. So where I'm using terminology, I'm explaining what it is because I've looked it up, and generally trying to put it in a more useful format. So in terms of trying to explain what the system is and what it does, we can see here from the text I've picked up, it's part of the system to help protect us from disease because it carries around the white blood cells. And those white blood cells are stored in things called lymph nodes. So in the episode of House, that's where this person had a tumor in these lymph nodes. So I was already starting to make connections between that. And it's these white blood cells that protect us from invaders like viruses and bacteria, which we call pathogens. And the lymphatic system essentially is just a system of tubes. So it's in many ways just like the circulatory system, it's a system of tubes, but these tubes are for the transportation of white blood cells and some other things called fatty acid, which are long chain carboxylic acids. So I know what that means because I've studied quite a lot of chemistry, but obviously, having looked that up and found out they're carboxylic acids, if you don't know what those are, you would also need to look up what they are too. So you need to make sure you know all the key information there. So those are my first two questions. The next one, we're trying to put it in context, which is really important. So in terms of how it works and how it actually fits in the body, so it works very much like the digestive system, actually. It uses rhythmic contraction of muscles to move material along, just like the intestines do. And this process is called peristalsis. But the intestines are roughly cylindrical. This system is half moon-shaped, so essentially half a circle cross-section area. And essentially, all of it feeds into two main ducts, the lymphatic duct and the thoracic duct. And the thorax is like the top half of your body. So this is a tube in the top half of your body, essentially. And it's from these tubes, it connects into our circulation or our blood movement system. So our white blood cells can be circulating with our blood. So here is one of the most important stages of learning, trying to fit the information in with things that we already know. So you heard me talk about how I'm trying to think of how it's like the digestive system, how it fits in with the circulation system. It's critical you try and place new information in the context of information you already know. That's how the brain knows what to do with the information that it's receiving. So, okay, so we've answered the questions that I was reading to find out. What do we do next? Well, the first key thing you need to understand is part of my philosophy is you should never stop learning. Why would you ever want to stop finding out new stuff? So there's essentially two ways you can proceed from here. If you're like me, when I find out new information, that just leads to me having far more questions. So having read this information, I wanted to know, well, okay, so we've got these lymph nodes full of white blood cells. How do they know actually when to release white blood cells? What actually triggers them to do that? Or we read about in the text how the lymphatic system is low pressure, but I happen to know that arteries are at very high pressure, so how can they connect together? So I have all of these questions that I want to know the answer to that lead me to the next stages of what I'm going to learn about. But in the context of being at school or university, obviously, maybe your focus is more, actually, there's some stuff that I need to be able to know because I've got an exam coming up on it. So most exams in school will have a specification that tell you what you need to be able to learn. So that will give you some guidance about where to go next. Or obviously asking a teacher for would also be helpful here. So, you know, okay, I know this information, what can I now do next? So pull all of that together. So a few questions that usually come up at this point. This really seems much harder work than, you know, my current reading. Is this really necessary? Yeah, it is. The reason reading can be ineffective is because it's not hard work sometimes, and you're really not thinking. You need to make it into a hard work activity to increase your chances of remembering stuff. Is the process always going to be this long? No, not necessarily. So if you're working your way through a book, which you often are, eventually what happens is you learn all of these different parts of the terminology. So like I said, I was new to the topic of the lymphatic system, so there were lots of words I needed to learn. The longer you spend learning a given topic, the more you'll see the same words used over and over again, and this process becomes quicker. So should you give it a go? Yes, absolutely. So find something you want to learn, get yourself a text, and start going through this process to learn some key information. You'll be amazed at how much of it you can actually remember in the future. So last thing, where should we try and find information? Use subject-specific sources. If you've got a teacher, ask them to recommend where's a really good place to read. But I would really caution you to avoid using Google as far as possible. It's not a system designed to help you learn stuff. It's an information retrieval system. So go stick for subject-specific source of information. So what next? Well, go out and learn something, and learn it by reading, and go use the strategies we talked about in this video to help you do that process. In terms of what I'm going to do in a future videos, I'm going to look at actually how we can ask good questions. So there are different things you can ask to learn different types of things. So we're going to talk about what questions to ask to help you learn different types of things. And I'm also going to talk about how to plan a session of learning. So how to decide how much to learn, how to go about doing it, those kind of things. But if you have any suggestions of things, I would be more than happy to hear those, so please do comment and let me know if there's anything that you think of that I could do. And I'd also really welcome any feedback on this video. So if there's anything that's not clear, please do feel free to comment and let me know. And finally, I'd just like to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you found it useful, and I hope very much that you'll use some of my videos in future.